Hi. Hi, everybody. Welcome. Today, we are presenting a webinar on logic models, which is, I'm sure, very exciting. We are very excited to talk about it today. Logic models are something that are very important that we hear a lot about. Funders request them. You'll hear about them in strategic planning. But not everybody always understands what exactly a logic model is or why they're important. So that is why we are here today. As we get kicked off, I want to remind you, Purpose Possible helps mission-driven organizations build the capacity they need to achieve their goals. We combine strategic thinking with hands-on implementation, providing expertise in fundraising, strategy, communications, and organizational development so leaders can focus on their mission. Today, I am joined by Elizabeth Lowe, who is our Senior Strategy Consultant, and Mary Ellen Grant, who is our Senior Fundraising Consultant. I am Laura Hennighausen. I am Purpose Possible's Director of Strategic Philanthropy, and we are going to be leading you through what logic models are today. So today, here are our main tasks. We are going to together understand the purpose of a logic model, learn the key components of what a logic model needs, be able to draft a basic logic model for a nonprofit program. So we're going to work through some examples to see what that actually means and how to do it. And we're going to identify some common mistakes and practical applications for this. Please ask questions as we go. We'll stop and ask them, but we'll also have some time for additional Q&A at the end. We will also be providing some templates and resources at the end of today's presentation. So as we reference kind of what a logic model is and how to do them, you can access a template to start making your own. So let's get started here. I am going to pass it over to my buddies to get started.
Hi, everyone. Thanks again for joining us. So what the heck is a logic model and why does it matter? This is what we're all trying to answer. So if somebody stopped you on the street and asked you to explain in 2 minutes exactly how your organization makes change, do you think you could do it? That's the quintessential elevator question, right? So a logic model helps you answer that question anytime for anyone, your team, your board, your funders, or yourself. So here is a super basic logic model. It's a simple but powerful framework that maps the connection between what your organization puts in, what you do with that, and then the difference you make with that. So you've probably heard other names for a logic model before. Theory of change is often used, and we'll look at those later and review what makes those different than a logic model. So here is our basic example of a logic model. We're going to go into more detail later. So we're going to pretend right now that we're working at a food pantry. So you can see what the various pieces here are: inputs, activities, outputs, outcomes, and impact. So inputs are everything that you bring to the work before you do anything. Your funding, your staff, volunteers, facilities, partnerships. It's taking stock of what you have. And again, we're going to come back to all of this in more detail as we go along. Activities are what you do with those resources. So that's your programs, your services, events, advocacy. This is the part of the organization that you probably know best because it's the work that you do every day. The outputs are going to be numbers. These are the direct, countable results of your activities: the number of people served, the number of sessions held, meals distributed. They tell you what you did, but not whether it made a difference. Again, think of these as your numbers, your hard facts. Now, outcomes are the actual changes that result from the work. Changes in knowledge, attitude, behavior, or conditions. this is really the difference between we distributed 5,000 pounds of food and families have reliable access to nutritious food. Impact is taking this further. So, impact is the big picture, long term change that you're working toward. This is often very similar, very tied to your organization's vision. So, the work of the logic model isn't necessarily solely in these categories, it's in the arrows that connect between them. The arrows represent your argument for why your work produces results. It's the if then logic that runs through this whole thing and makes your argument for why your work creates change. So let's look at why you would want a logic model. We'll look at the next slide. Great. And I love the giraffes here. Everybody needs a logic model. So why would you want a logic model? They help you meet funder expectations. They help you look inward, outward, and forward. So this seems like an exercise that takes a lot of time and a lot of brain power, and everybody's already stretched for both of these. So why should you bother doing this? So number one, funder expectations. Foundations and government funders request these routinely. They're often required. Having one already ready makes the grant application so much faster and so much stronger. And it signals to funders that you understand your own work and can demonstrate your results. But let's talk about why you'd want one even if you never apply for another grant. This is the part that gets me very excited. So number one is looking inward. Logic models give your whole organization, your staff, your leadership, your board, your volunteers, a shared language for how your work creates change. Everyone is pulling in the same direction. They give you an anchor to keep referring back to when you're faced with new ideas, extensions of programs, hyper-specific funding opportunities, etc. I'm the kind of person who would find it helpful to keep a copy of this like pinned up on the desk to remind you of the direction. When somebody's suggesting, oh, let's try this, you can look back at this and see, is this the way that we're supposed to be moving? It also helps you look outward. Once you know your outcomes and your impact, you have a direct, concise story to tell. A logic model feeds directly into how you talk about your work to donors, community partners, elected officials, media, really everyone. Instead of describing what you do, you can describe what changes because of what you do, which is a much more compelling conversation. And finally, logic models help you look forward. Once you've mapped your outcomes, you know exactly what to measure. A logic model can be a catalyst for adding or refining data measurement. It takes the guesswork out of evaluation, and it helps you collect data that actually tells you whether your activities are working. Building a logic model can also reveal things about your own organization that you didn't realize before, activities that don't connect to outcomes or outcomes that you care deeply about but you aren't actually working toward yet. So you can use it as a diagnostic tool and opportunity to refine your program. And over time, as your organization grows and changes, it's new staff, new leadership, new programs, your logic model gives you the framework to preserve the institutional knowledge that keeps your mission front and center. Finally, it's really important to remember that the organizations that get the most out of a logic model are the ones that treat it as a living document, not something that they build for a funder and just file away. So, what else do people refer to or call a logic model? By any other name? So here's a list here of other names that you've probably heard. And so let's look at how these are distinct from other things. So theory of change, result framework, program model, outcome map. Today we're using the words logic model, but you might encounter any of these terms from funders or partners. The underlying ideas are the same, but let's focus on some distinctions. So logic model versus theory of change. This is the most important and most commonly confused pair. A simple way to look at it is that a theory of change is the narrative, the story of why you believe your work produces change, including your assumptions about the world at large, whereas the logic model is the visual. This is the diagram that maps the story into boxes and arrows. So you can think about the theory of change is the XA and the logic model as the outline, or the logic model is the formula and the theory of change is the word problem. They're telling the same story in different formats. Many organizations use both. Some funders ask for one or the other. Some use the terms interchangeably. Okay, logic model versus program model. These are basically the same thing. A program model is more commonly used when the focus is on a single program rather than an organization's full body of work. It's often a lot less intimidating to start with a program model for one specific initiative before tackling the whole organization. Logic model versus outcome map. A logic model maps what your organization does and what it produces, and an outcome map zooms out to chart the full chain of change that has to happen in the world, including steps and actions that are beyond your direct control for that work to ultimately matter. It's less concerned with inputs and activities and more focused on mapping the chain of change from immediate outcomes through long-term impact. So, for example, if your goal is eliminating hunger in your community, an outcome map helps you chart everything that has to change, from individual families having enough food to eat, to affordable grocery access, to living wage jobs to get there. So this is beyond the scope necessarily of just what your organization is doing. Logic model versus a message map. This one's worth distinguishing clearly because it serves a genuinely different purpose. A message map is a communications tool, not a planning or evaluation tool. It charts how to clearly and directly explain your work. That said, a well-developed logic model feeds directly into a message map. Once you know your outcomes and impact, it helps you tell what story to tell. And a logic model versus a log frame or a logical framework. This is one you'll find in international development or government funded work. It's the same underlying concept, but it's a more structured format. A log frame is more rigid and matrix based. It has columns for indicators, means of verification, assumptions, aside all the regular things that we have in a standard logic model. Regardless, when a funder is asking you for one of these things, ask what format they prefer and what level of detail they're looking for. What they're really asking is, do you understand how your work creates change and can you demonstrate it? Hopefully, this is an exercise you've already done and put to work, and you can put it to work every day. So again, please put any questions you have about this in the chat, in the comments. We'll help address some of those. In the next section, we'll be going through some of the more specific steps to creating this. So first, common pitfalls is confusing outputs with outcomes. This one is challenging. It's hard to remember. Outputs are numbers, outcomes are things that are happening. Mary Ellen is going to lead us through more of those mechanics here in a bit. Making this too complicated to actually use. Again, think of this as that simple outline that you're going to be using on the everyday, the formula that you can refer back to make sure that everything is fitting within your program's vision and mission. And then finally is building this once and never revisiting it. Things change, right? A lot of conditions change. Funding change, staffs change, the needs of the community change. There's no set timeline for revisiting this, but you should probably at least take a look at it every year or so, and more often or less often, depending on the work that you're actually doing. So I'm going to bounce this over to Mary Ellen, who's going to lead us through the mechanics of the logic model, especially those pesky outputs and outcomes.
Thanks, Elizabeth.
Yeah.
So before I get started on the mechanics of the logic model, I'd love a quick reaction from each of you. If you could type in the comments either an emoji or phrase that comes to mind when you think of logic models. It will help me kind of get a read of where everybody is standing on this. Are you excited? Do you love it like us? Does it terrify you, confuse you, overwhelm you? I'll give it a second. But I will say that most clients I work with, here we go. The brain. Yes, it requires a lot of brain power for sure. I'd say most clients I work with on this, really, they feel overwhelmed and confused. and frankly, sometimes angry when a funder requires it. And that's totally normal. This really is often because the first time people encounter a logic model is for a grant application. And the deadline, of course, is right around the corner. And you don't have time and you don't have the energy or organized planning to make this come together really quickly. And for those of you who have done logic models, it can still be difficult because the templates and terminology required by different entities make all of the concepts even more confusing. And that just becomes challenging overall. So today, we're sharing the key categories that most logic models follow, and we're going to describe other formats and terms you might encounter along the way. So by breaking it down like this, we're really trying to give you the building blocks to successfully put together a logic model, regardless of the template before you. And I'll be covering a lot. So please feel free to put questions in the comments as we go. So again, the 5 categories that we've identified as the primary categories are inputs, activities, outputs, outcomes, and impact. We've really found that these 5 sections meet the key goal of a logic model, and that's to tell the fullest story of a program from start to finish. Some people, as Elizabeth mentioned, like to think of this as a series of if-then statements. If we use these inputs, then we can do these activities. If our organization does these activities, then we will have these outputs, et cetera, et cetera. The 5 categories we're highlighting here closely follow the W.K. Kellogg Foundation logic model. This is among the most popular adaptations used across the sector, so hopefully it's the one you'll encounter most often. The United Way also has a popular version, and they use a different format. So after I go through these 5 main categories, I'll share some other headings you might encounter. And after the webinar, we have our own template for you available for download, and we'll send links to both the Kellogg and United Way logic model guides. These can be extremely helpful tools when crafting your very own logic model, especially when the format aligns. All right, so next we're going into some tips. So before you get started, I find it's helpful to consider these 4 factors, particularly when you're working in a group. So first, kind of considering your vantage point. This really helps make sure that your storyline follows the same thread all the way through, from inputs to impact. And I find that there's 3 main perspectives or vantage points for a logic model. The first one being at the organization level. This would be a systems level perspective, or think outer space. When you get too detailed in an organization logic model, it becomes complicated for the reader to follow and really can muddle your story. The second perspective would be at the program level. This is probably thinking more from the mountaintop. This is the most requested perspective from funders. So it's the one that when you're required to do it, the one you'll encounter most. And the third one is the user experience. And this is more the street level. And I like to use this vantage point to kind of differentiate from that mountaintop view so that, again, you're telling a consistent story from beginning to end. I'd say this user level perspective is really the least common for logic models. I sometimes think that maps or flowcharts can be better formats if you have flexibility here, but it's an important distinction as you're thinking through the story you want to tell. Again, if you're doing this as a group, you'll want to make sure all contributors have the same definitions of the headings you're using. I find that people at organizations have really firm ideas about the key outputs, outcomes, and impacts that happen at their organization, but they're defining them all differently, and it's not computing as you're talking in a group. So once you start putting these on paper, you'll find that having a common definition that everyone's working from will help determine the correct category and making sure you're covering all the pieces. We'll discuss all the common definitions for each category next. And finally, I think it's a really nice thing to choose a format before you even get started. This is only relevant if you're able to choose and it's not prescribed by a funder. And you can always do this after the logic model has been created, but I really find that it helps to have a sense of how much space you're working with for word choice and the number of things you can include. Tables and flowcharts are definitely the most common formats. I've also seen some really creative formats that include symbols, shapes, or concept maps. I had one client who fit the entire logic model into the shape of an apple. Whatever you choose, just make sure the reader can easily follow from one category to the next, connecting all the dots. Today, we're going to use the table format because it's the most common and I find the most straightforward. Okay, so now we're going to dive in. This first category is inputs. It's also regularly called resources. So whether you see inputs or resources on your template, you can consider them the same thing. You can think about inputs as the spaces and staff you use to run your program. What are your organization's resources and assets to help your program move? Popular examples include staff, volunteers, interns, program materials, facilities, technology, and community partners. I find that interns and technology in particular are often the most overlooked. I also think that it's helpful to cross-reference this input or resource list with your program budget, your budget narrative, look to staff bios for staff experience, and it's always good to review your list of community partners to ensure that all constituencies are covered. This category, I'd say, is the most concrete in the logic model. The key here is really to list the things that directly relate to the success of your program or organization. You don't want the miscellaneous other because it takes away from the key central story. All right.
I'm going to jump in really quick. We have a couple questions that I think would be helpful to answer. So one, we are definitely going to clarify the difference between outputs and outcomes and impact. That is always confusing. Don't worry, we're going to spend some more time on that shortly. But we have another question, Mary Ellen, around when you said to make sure you're determining your headings ahead of time.
Sure.
What exactly do you mean by that?
Lovely. So you'll see, so I'm using headings and categories and probably some other terms all interchangeably, which again, here we go, logic models, different terms, same meaning. So the headings, the categories are the things you see at the top. Yes, Laura's highlighting those. So it's the inputs, activities, outputs, outcomes, impact. Yeah. And different, so I'm saying headings because different templates will have different categories and different headings at the top of the table. Great question.
So it's basically you're picking whether you're using the Kellogg model, the United Way, whatever it may be, and making sure, you know, you're just following one certain format before you get started. Just picking your template.
Definitely.
Easy peasy. Cool. Okay, let's go on. So we're did inputs and now we're on activities.
Exactly. Okay, so activities, this is where you have the opportunity to give a snapshot of the services provided by your program. So in a logic model, each section builds on the previous section. The activities listed here ideally draw from the inputs you listed in the first column, right? So using our food pantry example, the warehouse mentioned in our inputs example directly relates to the collecting, sorting, and distribution of food in our activities column. So typically, this is a place where you list the key activities of your program. You will not include numbers in this section. I know that doesn't work with a lot of people's brains because they're so tied together, but with a logic model, they're separated, activities and then outputs. So that brings us to outputs. And this is where you include the counts of the people, things, and activities that you've just listed in the column before. If you're doing this at the program level, I find it's really important to keep these counts focused on your program and its activities, avoiding outputs from other programs at your organization because it diverts from the main storyline and gets things muddled. This is where you really want to quantify the number and the frequency of program activities. Again, looking at our example, we include the quantities of both amount and duration, answering the key questions for this category, which is how much and how long. Okay, so now we go to outcomes. And I know outcomes are where people really start to get nervous. The beginning of the logic model is really tangible and concrete, right? You have your inputs, you have your activities, you have your outputs. Those are all quantifiable. They're easy for everyone to understand and capture. Outcomes become more squishy, right? These are where you begin to describe how your program makes a difference for the people you serve. And a good way I find to break down outcomes is to return to your activities and building on your story narrative and continuing with the if-then structure. So if activity, then participant will outcome, right? So I'll use our example. If our food pantry distributes food to families in need, then 80% of participating families will report reliable access to nutritious food. So strong outcomes focus on new knowledge, increased skills, changed attitudes, and modified behaviors. They also quantify growth with numbers or percentages. Some funders will require you to separate outcomes into timeframes. So your organization might also see the benefits to defining short, intermediate, and long-term outcomes for program planning as well. Here is a helpful breakdown how to think about the differences between those three categories. Short-term outcomes. These usually take less than 6 months to achieve. Knowledge and understanding focused outcomes are the most common here. Intermediate outcomes. These are usually 6 to 12 months, and I'd say skills and behavior focused outcomes are more popular here. And then long-term outcomes. You're looking at 12 months or more. If you're doing this for a 12-month grant application, it's what would happen at the end of the grant period. And I'd say that attitudes and behavior focused outcomes are usually what's in this category. Okay, moving along to our final category, impact. Impact is often interchanged with outcome. So this makes everything, again, a little bit more confusing. I've even seen some templates have the impact and the outcomes columns flipped. So I'm here to just tell you the simplest and most common way to look at impact. And that's to look at your long-term outcomes beyond 12 months, maybe spanning a decade from now, right? This is, again, like Elizabeth mentioned, where you really draw from your organization's vision statement. What are you really trying to achieve? The impact section is an opportunity to define what success looks like for the participants in your program. You can also define what success looks like for the community your program serves. Okay, one final note about these 5 main categories. This is related to process. Some people find it easier to start with impact, the vision, and go backwards. It's totally up to you and what works best for your brain. Okay, so after we go through those, right? Those, again, 5 main categories, but there's additional ones. And with different templates, you'll run into these frequently. So I would say if you're given a logic model template, you'll want to look at any additional guidance, definitions, or examples provided by the person who put it together. And because what we're describing here today might be defined differently from any other source. It really is, the possibilities on logic model templates really are endless. So starting with assumptions. If you encounter this section, you just it's the easiest way to deal with it is to look at your needs statement. And sometimes they even just call it needs statement. This is where you can include key research statistics, community data, and observations that contributed to the development of your program. Okay, next up, situation, external factors, risks. These are 3 different names for essentially the same section. Here you will describe social, physical, political, and institutional factors, or really challenges, right? These are the things that influence the outcomes and impacts of your program. It can also be a really good place to note any funding or staff retention considerations, especially if you're doing it for internal purposes. Okay, next up, indicators. This one also known as SMART objectives. SMART stands for specific, measurable, attainable, replicable, and time-bound. I know we all love when we see a SMART objective. This, the indicators section really combines your outcomes with the product of your outputs. So in other words, it defines what each outcome means using SMART formatting. It can sometimes be used in place of either outputs or outcomes. Sometimes it's used in addition to these categories. Again, there's so many options. So I'll use the same food pantry example from you earlier and put it in a SMART objective format. So after 12 months, 80% of families receiving food assistance through the program will report more consistent access to nutritious meals for their households. It is specific, naming 80% of families. It is measurable because it's reported by those families. It is attainable because it directly connects back to the activities that you have listed. It is replicable because it can be achieved again with new participants entering the program. And it is time-bound by stating that after 12 months of participating. So that I know is a lot. You can do whole webinars on outcomes and SMART objectives. So if you have questions, please add them and we can go into more detail about that later. Okay, final additional category, data collection. This can also be known as metrics because we love multiple names for the same things. If you see this, you'll want to, the key in this category is to directly tie it to the activities you've listed. Don't list every data collection method that your organization uses. You'll want to think about how it helps you measure the outcomes listed in your logic model. Some common examples, if you need them, pre and post questionnaires, surveys, checklists, case notes, interviews, focus groups, even document review. Okay. That covers most of what you'll find in the logic model. I found, again, that there are too many scenarios and combinations of what you might find. So if you see something different and have some questions, send me a note. I'd be happy to sort through it with you together. Okay, we have a template for you when you're creating your own logic model, and it will be sent by email after the webinar. Along with some other resources. So now I'm going to pass it over to Laura, who will walk us through an example logic model or two from start to finish.
Yes. So before I jump in, I wanted to bring back this slide of Mary Ellen's that is really helpful. And I saw we had some questions about this. So again, we're going to walk through a couple examples so you can see how this actually works. But your impact, again, those are your longest term, like goals, what happens as a result of everything you've done as part of this work. So your inputs are the things that you have, your factors, your resources. The activities are what you're doing with those resources. The output is how much you're doing or, how many people you're serving through those activities. The outcomes are what happens as a result of those activities and outputs. And then your impact is like the long-term impact or the long-term difference that your activities and outputs are creating or making possible for your communities. So I'm sure that's all clear as mud, but we will go through some examples here in a second. So first, let's start with a very silly, basic example that maybe a lot of us can relate to. So we have an example. This is clearly not, well, maybe it could be a nonprofit cause, but this is just a good example of kind of thinking through what these different categories actually mean. So here's our situation that we have, and this is what we're going to map out. We've adopted a cat, this lovely orange kitty here. The cat wants absolutely nothing to do with you. And we know that our goal is to develop a loving relationship with that cat. We want the cat to like us, right? So we are going to map out a logic model of what we're going to do to reach that ultimate outcome, that ultimate impact of having the cat like us. Ready? Okay. So the first thing we do is we have to think about what are our inputs. So in this scenario, we have obviously a cat and you, or whoever the owner is. We might have cat treats. We might have toys. We have time. So the time we're going to spend, that is a resource. That is something that we are using in this activity. A cat bed and patience, right? Not all of these things are available forever. Some of these might be finite resources, but in this case, these are kind of all of the inputs, all of the mix of recipe ingredients that we can put into this work. Then we get to our activities. So what are we actually doing with those inputs, right? So we are going to feed the cat daily. We are going to play with the cat. We are going to sit quietly near the cat. We are going to learn cat body language for what that's worth. And we are going to avoid unwanted cuddling, right? So these are all the different things that we're doing. If you remember, our ultimate goal is to get this cat to like us. We have different things that we're going to use to make that possible. And these are the activities that we are going to be doing to get us to that ultimate goal. So we have these activities. We've done these good things. That means how much the outputs, again, this is how much, or, you know, the number of things, the amount, what are those actual like countable results of the activities. So in this case, we've done 30 play sessions. We have done 60 treat distributions. We have spent 20 hours near the cat quietly, and we have purchased the one cat bed, right? So these are the things, we've done the activities. These are those actual tangible results. So what we've actually accomplished through those activities. And because we have those outputs, that means, and I have here separated them into, again, our short-term, medium-term, and long-term outcomes. Short-term here, we could say that maybe the cat stops hiding. We also know the cat is tolerating our presence, right? So these are outcomes directly related to the activities and outputs, right? These things are happening because we've done this with these inputs. So those are our short-term outcomes. Our medium-term outcomes, maybe things that are going to take longer, but are still going to be directly resulting because of our activities and outputs. The cat is going to start seeking interaction with us, maybe. The cat might sit near us voluntarily. So we feel like we're moving toward that goal, right? And then our longer term outcomes, something that might take us longer to get to, is the cat will become hopefully a affectionate companion, right? So you can kind of see the progression. The cat is not going to immediately become lovey-dovey. We're going to have some stages of outcomes as we go along. And again, all of these outcomes are only happening because of the activities that we've conducted, right? So in this case, this example, the long-term impact, so the overall thing that we are trying to achieve with this work is that there is going to be an improved quality of life for the cat and for the human, right? So the cat now has its cat bed, it is affectionate, it's doing all of these things. That impact is only possible because of all of those other factors we've talked about. The inputs, what we've put into it, the resources, our activities, what we actually did, the outputs, how much of those things we did, and what that kind of those trackable metrics might look like, those outcomes, so the stages or the eventualities of what those activities resulted in, all culminating in one big long-term impact. I hope that helps. That's a very silly example. We're going to do a more serious one in a second, but I feel like it's helpful sometimes to think about something in that term just to kind of make it a little clearer. I also think, in this case, we already knew what we wanted our impact to be in the very beginning. And it just helped us then maybe you want your impact to be that more kids read at reading level or at their grade level, or more families are not hungry. Then you can kind of step through, okay, what is my particular program doing? What are the things that we have? What are our resources? What are the activities that we're doing? What do those activities result in? And then how does that get us to that long-term impact that we're trying to achieve? I'm glad to see somebody on LinkedIn said that they are deeply invested in this cause of getting a cat to like us. So I hope this also just helps you in your personal life. Okay, let's do one more. And then we, of course, will be open for Q&A. If you have questions, feel free to start dropping them in and we will get to them after this. So let's do a logic model example that is more nonprofit related. So in this case, we have a nonprofit called the Neighborhood Friendship Project. Their mission is to reduce loneliness and social isolation among older adults. The situation is the organization has learned that many older adults in their community live alone, they have limited transportation, and they report feeling isolated. They also know that research shows that social isolation is linked to poorer health outcomes and reduced quality of life. So they know that's all in the mix, and they want to plot out what their program specifically is going to do to advance that impact, that long-term helping seniors, in this case, not feel socially isolated. These logic models, as we work through it, this is also the place where you can really differentiate what makes your program unique, what is your special sauce or special mix of ingredients and activities that is different than other nonprofits, why your project is really making that impact that you seek. Okay, so let's work through this example. So in this case, again, we're trying to decrease social isolation. The Neighborhood Friendship Project has a variety of things that they can offer, their ingredients to their special sauce. They have staff, they have volunteers, they have funding, that's nice. They have meeting space, they have transportation partners. So we've already identified that transportation can be an issue for these seniors, and that is something that this project has. We have community partnerships to leverage, and we have marketing materials. These things are all probably inputs that a lot of you have. You can also get as specific as you want here. If you have something that's very particular to your program or organization, that's always great to show here. So now we'll move to activities. So activities are, what are we doing with all of those ingredients? What the Neighborhood Friendship Project is going to do is they are going to host monthly community lunches. They're going to organize hobby and interest groups. They're going to coordinate volunteer visitor programs. They're going to provide transportation assistance. And they're going to connect participants to those community resources. So the inputs are all the ingredients, the activities are what you're doing. So how, like the recipe, right? How you're cooking them. And then the outputs is, okay, well, what does that actually result in? That means, we're doing monthly community lunches. That means that during this program or project that the logic model is talking about, we will then have 24 monthly social gatherings held, 200 participants attending events, 50 volunteers recruited, 12 community partners engaged, and 500 rides provided through transportation assistance. So again, inputs, your ingredients, activities, what you're doing with them, outputs is what that results in, and then your outcomes. So what does that mean? In this case, again, we've separated these into some short-term and medium-term outcomes. So after we have those outputs, after we've done our 24 monthly social gatherings, things like that, we know that participants are going to have met new people. They're going to increase their social interaction. They will become aware of local opportunities for engagement. And then medium term, they will then develop meaningful relationships. So short term, they might meet some people, and then it'll take a little bit longer through this work, but they will start developing actual meaningful relationships with the people they meet. They will regularly engage in community activities. So not only did they show up, but they're going to come back, and they feel more connected to others. So they're having some of these outcomes, again, as a direct result of the activities that you provided. And then the long term, all of those things add up to mean that for this impact, this organization's project, older adults in our community are experiencing stronger social connections, improved well-being, and a greater sense of belonging. So again, all of that is adding up to the ultimate impact that we're trying to make. This is simply, you are mapping out the steps and the different qualities or quantities of things you are doing to achieve that impact. Okay. I'm going to go, let's start looking at some questions here. So those are our two examples. I'm happy to flip back to any of our previous slides. Again, you will be able to download some of our templates here. But I see we do have a couple questions. So we have one here. Are these categories used to describe what has already taken place or what we want to take place? That's a great question. I'll answer, but Elizabeth and Mary Ellen, please jump in. I would say this could be either, right? In some cases, you are logic modeling for a funder or for yourself, kind of mapping out the logic really of like why you're doing the things you're doing, right? How that project is getting to that impact. Sorry. But if you are proposing a new program or project, right, and maybe you're seeking funding for something you haven't done yet, a logic model can be helpful to really show the steps of why these activities, why these inputs that you need are actually going to help you get to that impact in the end, if that makes sense. But Mary Ellen and Elizabeth, please jump in too. What do you think?
I agree completely. You know, I love using this as truly a modeling exercise when you're creating a new program, because a lot of times, you know, you're like, oh yeah, well, this makes sense. And it's, you know, being able to chart out like the actual steps that are taking place makes it easy to see that you're on not only on the right path, but gives you the building blocks along the way to, you know, to build a program that's not only going to be successful, but is going to be measurable. And that data collection piece is something that I like to return to a lot because it's something that's really often overlooked by organizations of every type. And they're like, oh man, I wish I had, you know, I had this information in the last 3 years or, you know, whatever. Best time to plant a tree is 20 years ago, right? It's the same kind of thing. But so if you're able to put this kind of model in place as you're building your program, it also gives you that structure of what you need to be tracking as you go along to be able to show the results so that you can go back to your funders. And then, you know, when you're looking at future funding, you're able to show them the results of what you've already got. So it's a twofold benefit I see of doing this in advance when you can.
The only thing I'd add is that when you're doing this for a grant application, they often want it tied directly to the grant application. So you have to be forward thinking. But everything else they've said is totally true too. Yeah.
Yeah, I like thinking of a logic model as, if you will all remember doing math homework, right? You might have the equation and you show your answer, but you need to show your work, right? Like, what are you doing to get to that impact or that ultimate result? So this is kind of a process or an opportunity for you to show your work. Or I think to Elizabeth's point, to judge to see whether something that's proposed, some proposed activities are going to help you get to that ultimate cause, that ultimate impact. So let's say, a board member comes in and is like, let's open a zoo or something like that. We have a lot of animal pictures today, so that's why I say that. But you can kind of judge it and say, well, is that actually, so let's say we open a zoo, we do this activity, is it going to impact what we actually are trying to do? Is it going to help us achieve our mission, in other words? So I think that's kind of helpful.
I'm a big fan of using this as kind of that thing that you can go back to your board or go back to this, really influential volunteer and say, here's this thing that we all agreed on. And this is what fits. And these things are outside of this model, which is not what we're doing right now. Let's hold this for another time, or, when we reassess, we can look at how that might work. But for now, this is what's keeping us on the path. And that's the way that I love to use the logic model on an ongoing basis, in addition to obviously satisfying these funding requirements.
Absolutely. Helps you keep organized. So let's see, do you most often see the additional categories included in a logic model question or tacked on elsewhere? So those are when, I think Mary Ellen was speaking to the SMART goals, all those different things. Where do you usually see those come up?
Both and. So I think it goes back to the idea that a logic model is the visual representation of your program, right? So a lot of times funders request this in addition to asking all of the questions about outcomes and activities in that narrative portion of the application. So it really, again, there's so many options about what funders want to see and how they want to see it. So you can encounter this 10 different ways, sometimes from the same funder.
Heard. Okay, we have an outcomes question. How important is defining key terms for clarity? For example, defining what meaningful relationships actually means in your example. What do y'all think? I think.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, you go.
I was going to say, can be really tricky in the logic model format, right? It's always best to be as specific as possible. However, when you have a robust program with a lot of activities, you have to, and everything has to fit on one page with 1-inch margins. There's not a lot of space. So I'd say, again, this is a visual representation. And if you have to use a short phrase like meaningful relationships on your logic model, then make sure in your narrative that you're backing that up with a lot more detail.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that speaks to our next question too here from Collins. Mm-hmm. Collins is asking, should the logic model fit on one 8.5 by 11 piece of paper?
Fit on a smaller piece.
Right. Yeah. I think like in many cases I've seen when I've been given this to fill out for a case, it's usually on one piece of paper. I think the point of the logic model, a lot of us, right, we're talking about our programs. We're really excited. We've got all this stuff going on and we can go on and on and on and on and on for a million pages about all of the work, right? Part of the purpose of a logic model, to me at least, is to get it down to just the key elements, like the very basics. These are our inputs. These are the things we have. We've got time, we've got people, we've got a meeting place, we've got a school bus. Then what are those activities, right? Like as basic as possible. So it's kind of a quick glance that a funder can look at or a program manager can look at to kind of keep on track. You will likely have pages and pages of more narration, maybe about those programs and a lot more explanation. You're not going to just have a logic model, right? But I think the logic model is helpful in summarizing and really making sure you are getting to the point of what you are wanting to achieve, if that makes sense. Oh, we have another good question from Tambra. Which members of an organization usually collaborate to create the logic model? What do y'all think?
all of them, but not too many.
Right.
And that's the short answer to this is, this is like when you're thinking about strategic planning, you want to have a lot of the different voices in the room because people are bringing really important different perspectives to this work and will especially define some of the things like the outcomes differently perhaps than somebody who's like only in programming or only in development or that kind of a thing. But obviously you get a lot of cooks in the kitchen and that's going to be kind of difficult. So you're going to want to have somebody who's really leading this project and, has that strategic mind to run it through. But, perhaps a couple of different voices is what I have seen as successful, but would love to hear from my colleagues as well.
I agree with that, Elizabeth. I think that having folks from different areas, like assuming you have an organization with multiple staff members, right? Having those different perspectives can be really helpful. I think often I see logic models most used by, or at least led by program teams. And then you can have, so like the ones we talked about are pretty much project program kind of focused, like the neighborhood friendship project, they're going to do, there's a bunch of different activities. Those might be separate different programs they're doing. So you can have one that's like overall the entire organization. And then you can have smaller ones that just focus on one particular program you're doing. So I think a lot of times that is where I see them used. But I think like the overall organizational ones are often more used by the folks, at the top, like the executive directors and folks to make sure that, like if I know that my mission is to make sure senior adults are less socially isolated and we have all these different programs and somebody is suggesting a new program, I would be looking at that as the executive director or as the head of programs to see, does this program fit within our logic model? Does it make sense with our other projects and programs? Is it helping us get to that ultimate impact that we need? Is it already duplicating other things that we're doing? I think it's just a really helpful framework in that sense. Whether a funder is asking you for it or not, I would encourage everybody to do this exercise because I think it can be really helpful in thinking through what you're doing and making sure it actually makes sense. Cool. Let's see. So I think that was all of our questions for now. I'm going to pull up our last little piece here. If you scan this QR code, it'll take you to our templates. So we have a template that we have used. We've adopted the Kellogg model and just put some notes on it. So that can be a helpful piece for you to work through and think about how to make your own logic model. But we've also have some links to some of the other templates as well that we will send out. And when you scan that QR code, you can follow along and get our contact information as well. I really hope that you will make sure you're following Purpose Possible. We've got a variety of social media links that you can find on our website and I believe at the QR code as well. But we try and do these webinars fairly often and they are always free and open. So additionally, if you have an idea of a topic that you'd love for us to talk about, please share because we want to make sure that this is helpful for folks out there in the field. So thank you very much. Thank you, Elizabeth and Mary Ellen, for joining me on this today. I hope this was helpful. And again, if you have questions further on what to do with the logic model or why you should do one or how to do one, please be in touch and we'll be happy to help. Thank you so much.